In 1974, NASCAR would add one of the most unique racetracks on the schedule, Pocono Raceway, a 2.5-mile triangle located in the hills of Pennsylvania. The track stands as an area of endurance, ability to handle multiple grooves, and the ultimate test for stock car drivers' ability and patience. The track has seen its amounts of excitement as well as great opportunities for afternoon naps. However, there has been a lingering feeling of danger lurking around each turn. It seems like no matter how much improvement is done to the track, every so often we see an incident that shocks the racing world. Today, we look at some of the craziest events to ever happen at Pocono Raceway. In 1980, one of the first drivers to experience the brutal force of what Pocono had to offer was the king himself, Richard Petty. On lap 56, Richard Petty would lose a tire going around the corner, causing a hard impact to the right side of the car. Unfortunately, it would not be the only impact that he would experience.
The car. Richard was still fine inside. There's Buddy Baker going by in front of you. Now watch this. Chuck Bone appears spinning backward. He gets by Richard. Now here comes Darrell Waltrip for the hit. Waltrip at that point right into Petty's door. That's when Richard was injured in that crash, right at that point.
Three-time champion Darrell Waltrip would hit Petty's car on the driver's side, causing the king to suffer a broken neck. Richard Petty would describe the impact as among the worst of his career. Miraculously, he would start the next Sunday race at Talladega Superspeedway. From legend to another, Dale Earnhardt also experienced the worst in what the tricky triangle had to offer. In 1982, Earnhardt would have his car flip and crash with late NASCAR star Tim Richmond. Earnhardt did not escape the carnage without injury, as he would receive a broken kneecap. Same with Petty. Earnhardt would race the very next week. However, the rest of the year would be trying for the future 7-time champ, as he would have one of his worst seasons of his career. One of the only fortunate things that would come from these incidents were the fact that both drivers were able to continue on with their careers. The same could not be said for the '83 champion of Bobby Allison. In 1988, Allison would lose control and would be T-boned on the driver's side by Jocko McGiacomo, causing him to suffer a closed head wound and requiring months of rehabilitation. It would be the crash that would end his legendary career. The weird thing about Pocono is that the track had an act for keeping things close to home when it came to NASCAR's biggest legends, as the track not only had an act for injuring legends in the sport, but members of their family as well. 4 years after Bobby Allison's career-ending incident, Davey Allison would have by far the scariest accident to ever be recorded at the racetrack. Davey Allison would suffer several injuries, including major damage to his eye region, but somehow showed up to the following race at Talladega Superspeedway. He was able to finish in the top 3. Almost 10 years later in 2002, Dale Jr. would also experience a similar incident as Davey Allison, but would fortunately keep all his wheels on the ground. His teammate, however, was not so lucky. In the opening lap of the race, both Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Steve Park would make contact and head towards the inside wall.
Oh, trouble! Steve Park is off into the infield. Another car valve over on his lid. It's Park and Dale Jr. Terrible crash.
Unfortunately, Pocono was behind on the times, as their inside wall was still guardrail instead of a concrete barrier. Both drivers were able to walk away from the incident with 0 injuries. However, the crash that we saw on live TV was definitely one of the most scariest in 2002. Surprisingly, Pocono Raceway decided to keep its guardrail barriers after this incident, opting to put dirt behind the guardrails to reduce damage done to the walls. This would prove to be a terrible idea, as less than 9 years later, Pocono would experience another one of the scariest crashes in NASCAR history. Near the end of the race, Kurt Busch would experience a hard crash that would inevitably end his chances to continue in the race. However, he would not be the one who suffered the worst fate in the incident.
Man, look at this car.
Oh man, further back, Elliott Sadler, and look at this engine is out of this thing.
Oh my God.
the helmet off already. That is the best news.
You can see he is
in some pain. Oh man, I hate to see this. Look at the front of that car.
Engine completely out of the car. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Hey, look at that. Head on into that Armco.
That's down in a 90-degree corner.
To this day, we don't have a clear video on what happened to Elliott Sadler's car after he hit the inside wall, but we can kind of get an idea on how violent it must have been for the multi-time winner in the Cup Series. Pocono would quickly update their inside walls to be better equipped for impact absorption similar to the outside retaining walls. However, the exterior walls were having their own issues. By the mid-2000s, Pocono's walls already had safer barriers along the turns of the racetrack, helping with eliminating the initial impact. But as more legends in the sport would show, the impacts were still super massive. One issue that Pocono has is that the racetrack has some of the longest straightaways on NASCAR's schedule, a result that leads to massive speed but requires a lot of brakes to make the corners. If a car were to lose that vital mechanic in a race, then the outcome can be rather frightening. In 2006, Jeff Gordon would be involved in what you would describe as one of the scariest crashes that the four-time champion would ever be involved in. In the final laps of the race, Jeff Gordon would be looking to finish inside the top 10 when his brakes would give out going into turn 1.
10 to go with a whopping 5.4 second lead, and Jeff Gordon has crashed.
Man, that is a bad crash. It's a hard lick. Drivers.
He said the brakes went out.
Boy, and he's hurting. I don't like the looks of that at all.
So it's a long way to go to get to that wall. Here's Gordon climbing out. That's a good sight.
That's a great, I tell you, I'm relieved. Man, oh man.
Jeff Gordon was trying to put together consecutive top 10 finishes for the first time since March.
Thank goodness for those things up there, guys. Those safer barriers. That makes all the difference in the world.
Although the safety of the Gen 4 car had greatly improved from the beginning of the new millennium, people could still hear it in the voice of Jeff Gordon as well as the commentators that he narrowly escaped serious injury that day. To this day, Jeff Gordon recalls this incident as one of the worst that he has ever experienced and potentially the beginning of his back injuries that he was complaining about near the end of his career. Hendrick Motorsports almost saw their top driver's career come to an end prematurely. Luckily, that was not the case, as he remained a championship contender till 2015. The same could not be said for his protege Jimmie Johnson, after a similar incident with his brake failing would happen in 2017. At about the halfway point of the Exalta Presents the Pocono 400, Jimmie Johnson would have his brakes fail going into turn 1 at over 200 miles per hour.
It won't matter. Wow.
Jimmie Johnson slams the wall in Pocono.
Oh my.
Fucking brake fail. Wowzers.
Running 7th, Johnson with a brake problem, and Jamie McMurray has destroyed the right side of his car.
Yeah, whose brakes fail? Was it Jimmie Johnson or was it Jamie McMurray?
I don't know.
It was determined that both Jimmie Johnson and Jamie McMurray would experience brake failures, leading to hard impacts with the outside wall. Even though the impacts were incredible to say the least, both drivers escaped the incident uninjured. However, their careers would never be the same, as neither driver would win a points-paying race after the 2017 incident. The most heartbreaking thing about this stat is that only the year prior, Johnson was the Cup Series champion, and even the race before, he would win his last race in the Cup Series. As mentioned on this channel a few weeks ago, the walls have played a vital role in safety with the NASCAR racing world, including fencing. Fencing mostly plays the role of keeping cars inside the racetrack rather than seeing them fly over the barrier. An event that was a fear at superspeedways, but not so at Pocono. Sure, the cars were going fast, but they never had to worry about cars going over the walls around the corners of the racetrack. Technically, they were right about that, but the straightaways were a different story.
Big. That's big.
Casey Kane gets turned around. Greg Biffle involved. Mark Martin is there. No caution has come out. They're going to let him race back as Gordon piles in, and now the caution.
6. You knew that was going to be big when you saw the 9 coming back across the racetrack.
On the final lap of the 2010 Gillette Fusion 500, chaos would ensue in the middle of the field as multiple cars would wreck on the back straightaway. The one that worried many was Casey Kane, as he looked to be heading out of the racetrack into the trees that lined up alongside the long straightaway. Luckily, the car would rest down on the racetrack, meaning NASCAR would not see a similar incident to 1993 with Jimmy Horton. The incident would require Pocono Raceway to install fencing along the racetrack, putting it at the same standards as all the racetracks on the Cup Series schedule. But even with all the safety enhancements to the track, walls, and cars, NASCAR could not steer away from injuring legends on the racetrack.
Look at his brother, Kurt Busch. Still as good as he's ever been behind the wheel of a race car.
Yep.
And you'd think that Kurt could go as...
Hang on to it. Hard into the wall. Wow.
That was a hard hit for that right rear quarter panel, and you see the damage that was coming to the green flag, and this is going to...
In last year's event at Pocono Raceway, a rather odd incident would happen in a qualifying run involving the 2004 champion of Kurt Busch. At first, many were not concerned as the incident looked like any other involving a single car incident. However, that would quickly change when Kurt Busch would announce that he would not race in the Sunday event. Turns out that the accident would be the last time we would ever see the Las Vegas native race in a Cup Series car. While sitting out for a majority of the 2022 season, Kurt Busch announced that he would step away from full-time competition in 2023, with the possibility of running the season on a part-time basis. It was one of the most devastating news to come out of the first season with a next-gen race car, and of course, it resulted from an incident at NASCAR's most unique track, Pocono Raceway. Today, NASCAR has seen 93 Cup Series races at Pocono Raceway. It has provided us with many historical moments, both good and bad. Some drivers have done their best to conquer the racetrack, while others continually struggle with it to this day. Even in the most recent event, drivers still take heavy impacts due to the design of the racetrack. Will that ever stop in the future? Perhaps. But for now, the track that sits up in the Pocono Mountains will continue to rain chaos as long as NASCAR keeps returning to this iconic racetrack.